if you are over-functioning in every area of your life and people are telling you that you're over-functioning and it's normal for you, I think that's a good red flag. Like maybe that's a reason to just like go check in with a therapist and find out if there's something that could give you more peace.
What's up, guys? It's Jeff Burningham, and welcome to the Extraordinary Us podcast. This is going to be a good one. I'm already laughing with my guests. It's fun to interview friends and people that you may or may not have heard of, tell their stories. Here's the purpose of the podcast. Number one, no matter our differences, and we're all different, we all always have a lot more alike than we do different. And somehow we've forgotten that in this day and age, in politics, et cetera, et cetera. Number two, because of that, let's exhibit compassion towards each other. There is too much competition and comparison, especially in our culture, and not enough compassion. We are all fellow travelers on this journey, and we need to reach out and lift each other up. Number three, too often we let mistakes of the past and fear for an unknown future cloud our judgment and help us make bad decisions. I hope that this podcast elicits more compassion for those around you and eradicates fear and helps us make good decisions. And today I have in the podcast studio friends of mine, longtime friends, Tim and Aubrey Chaves.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey.
What's up,
So
guys?
good to be with
Thanks
you.
for having us.
It's always good to see you guys.
Always good, yes.
So let me tell you a little about these guys if you don't know them. They are both entrepreneurs in their own right, I'm going to say. I met Tim as a young up-and-coming entrepreneur, and we have quite a history in entrepreneurship.
It's true.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
And there is Siri. Siri's having a hard time here. Tim and I invented Siri together. And no, actually, we didn't. Don't believe that. So yeah, Tim and I have some ups and some successes together in entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And we also have some downs. This reminds me of, we had a little office when I started Peak Capital Partners, many years ago. We had a little office at the mouth of the canyon here in Provo, and Tim office in the basement.
That's right.
And
Yes.
I would run down those stairs to the basement every other day or
Yeah.
so. And we had this business,
Oh,
which
here
shall
we go.
not be named.
Yep.
Should we not name it, or
We
should we
probably
name
shouldn't.
it?
Okay, we can name it.
What
It was Cortex.
Oh yeah,
Cortex
Cortex.
memory. Yep.
And I remember we had so many problems with that little business.
It was
and we were racking our brains and minds. What did I call it, Tim?
I believe you called it the devil's favorite hobby. That was,
I was gonna say the devil's playground, but I
Yeah,
think
no,
I think it was right. The devil's
it
favorite
was
hobby.
not inaccurate.
Oh, that is what I called it.
Yeah,
Now,
tough business. Tough
yeah,
business.
one time Tim and I just have our heads down on the desk and we're like, again, another. And I'm like, Cortex, the devil's favorite hobby.
That is 100% true, unfortunately, yeah.
But by the way, it's gone up since there. Things have
Yes.
gone well for Tim in entrepreneurship. Tim went to Harvard. Tim and Aubrey took their family to Harvard. We'll talk about that a little bit. I think I wrote a letter of recommendation.
You did,
to
yes.
Harvard.
Right.
Well, and
yeah.
I should give the devil's favorite hobby its due as well. That made it into an essay in my
No.
application. Yes, it did. There were two essays that you had to write. One on a success that you had and one on a setback.
Failure.
Yeah, or a failure. And I wrote about Cortex. And like
Was the title of the essay "The Devil's Favorite Hobby"?
Oh man, it should have been. But it is one of those things where at least, even though it was tough at the time, you look back on it and are able to connect the dots and say like, everything, maybe not everything, but most things can turn around or at least be learning experiences that help you in the long run.
And isn't that a great metaphor for life? That's
Yeah.
how life is. Aubrey is Tim's wife. They are, and she's an entrepreneur in her own right. Are you still doing cakes? I remember this.
Yes, yeah.
They were
kind of-
beautiful and
Thank you.
delicious.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So it was just a creative outlet that sort of morphed into a business. We had little kids at home, and we lived in a little apartment at the time, and it was a way to be creative without creating clutter.
That's
we could
cool.
just, we
Clean it
could
up,
eat the
eat
crafts.
it.
Yeah. And it kind of grew and grew, and then I started making wedding cakes and birthday cakes and bar mitzvah cakes, and it was kind of a fun little hobby
awesome.
that I did in the middle of the night.
And is that still happening?
Yeah.
What's the name of the business?
It's called Luna Cakes.
Luna Cakes.
Luna Cakes, yeah.
Check it out.
Luna because it means moon in Spanish, and her
Yeah.
preferred method of working is everyone goes to bed, and she stays up all night, and we wake up and there's a beaual cake sitting on the counter in the morning.
And then
that's
you're like,
literally how
look
it
what's
works.
for breakfast,
No,
kids.
exactly, yeah.
We have the best family ever. We eat cake for breakfast.
Yep.
You
We do.
sprinkle
Frosting.
frosted flakes on the cake. The funny thing is, I don't even think you guys eat sugar. Tim, are you eating sugar right now or
Yeah,
not? I know you have gone in and out of eating sugar in your life. This has been like a roller coaster.
You've seen me fluctuate. No, I would say I follow a very moderate diet now. So like if you were to offer to me a sweet roll right now, I would probably
You'd take it.
Yeah.
What about you,
That's
Aubrey? Are you eating
Yeah,
sugar?
yeah. But this
Okay.
is funny. We just talked about this. Ezra yesterday said, remember when you guys thought watermelon just had too much sugar? And we were like, oh yeah, there was an era.
There was an era
Avoid-
where watermelon was it?
Avoid watermelon.
Isn't
Watermelon at all costs.
like
yeah.
97% water?
I
or
believe so.
something
But the
like
3% is sugar, and that's a problem.
Oh, I told you we were gonna have fun today. 97% water, 3% sugar in the watermelon. Yeah, I always thought watermelon was a healthy snack, but anyways, okay. Not sometimes
We eat
in the
watermelon.
Chaves'
We
house.
eat
Sometimes that is not the case.
Yep.
So these guys are awesome. They have 4 beautiful children. And today we're going to talk about faith because they are also, I would call them the co-CEOs, but we have friends that may not allow that. They are on the board of Faith Matters and also do the podcast.
That's right.
Which is a super cool podcast. If you haven't checked it out, do so. And so we're going to talk about entrepreneurship a little bit. We're going to talk about faith, families, mental health, etc.
Yeah.
Where should we start? How about this? Tell us about Chaves. Where does that name come from? Like,
Oh.
tell us about your
That is
heritage.
a great place to start.
Yeah,
actually.
that's where we start. Back to the beginning, guys.
Yeah, for sure. So the name goes back to my grandfather. We don't know a lot. Okay, so I should say there's always been some question around my grandfather's last name and who his biological parents were. And regardless, he became an immigrant to the U.S. as a baby. This is back in the 20s. His mother that raised him had the last name Chaves, and it's a Portuguese name. It means keys. So we do have, and we just got our ancestry DNA done, and it was really cool to see. And I don't know if you've seen this this feature where you can go and just view a map. And it'll sort of like do hotspots of where your ancestor, or not your ancestors, but your blood relatives that have had their ancestry done and made public live. And so, like, we both, see obviously a lot all around the U.S., but I've got a real hotspot over in Puerto Rico, where I have tons and tons of blood relatives. We've never been. It's one of our goals. We hope to go soon and meet that whole side of the family because it's totally, in many ways a world apart from the culture that we live in, and it'd be really cool.
Yeah, Puerto Rico is a great place.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. I think you'll be there soon. I see your future.
I
and
hope
think
so.
in the next
Yeah.
year you may spend some time there.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
But you both grew up in Utah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
In fact, I think you were high school friends or sweethearts. Sorry if I don't
Yes.
remember exactly when
It's
the
complicated
sweetheart
and
part
painful.
Remember,
Yeah.
but I think you've been friends. Like, did you
Yeah.
grow up in the same neighborhood or go to the same schools, or I can't remember.
Very close. Yeah, very close. We met when we were like 12 or 13.
Yep, 7th grade
Middle school,
English.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Were
we
you
knew
guys
each other a
both in
long
the
time.
awkward phase, or did Aubrey not have an
so
awkward
awkward.
phase?
I had always wanted glasses and braces, and in 7th grade I got both. Like, all my dreams came true. So no, I didn't have an awkward phase.
That's better than Sally. Sally, I make fun of her. She had headgear. Actually, she
Oh,
didn't,
that's
but I say that. She had these huge glasses. She had like the bangs and the. And
Did
Oh,
you know
yeah,
Sally?
the
Did you know
bangs,
Sally?
No, I didn't
Okay.
know. So I'm saying this is from pictures,
Yeah,
and she
okay.
just had braces. But
Yeah.
I tell the kid she had headgear, and she gets so mad. Anyways, we digress.
Yeah.
Okay, so you met.
Yep. We dated
Yeah.
in high school.
Okay.
It was a little bit off and on. We don't need to go
Yeah.
too deep into that, but started dating really seriously. I served an LDS mission, got back when I was 21, dated for 6 months, and got married. And we've been together ever since. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Isn't a great marriage like the best thing to ever happen to you?
it is 100%. Yeah.
I agree. It's super
Yeah.
fun. So you both, Tim, you both went to BYU, I think.
So I actually went to Utah State.
Okay. Oh, good.
In
That's
elementary
good. You're an
education.
Aggie.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I am.
Sally's from Logan, and
Oh,
her dad
really?
was the dean of the business college at Utah
Really?
State.
Oh,
Oh,
So-
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Sally studied elementary education. So did you
Really?
teach?
Yeah, I did.
What grade?
Until our oldest, 4th grade.
4th grade.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so it's so fun. All of my students are like 22, 23 and getting married. And so
Oh,
now I
wow.
make their wedding cakes. It's been so fun. Like they grew
Come
up.
full
They grew
circle.
up and I get to see them all now again.
I'll say that she is the best 4th grade teacher ever, because literally every year since she she taught 4th grade for 2 years, and she has sent every one of those students a birthday card every single year.
Are you serious?
Well, I had a first class and a last class, so it was kind of a lucky situation. They all feel like, they were the first.
And
They
so
were like our first kid.
she's really kept in touch with them, and they're really close now. And so they're getting married and having babies, and Aubrey's making cakes for them. And it seems like every couple of weekends we're interacting with at least one of them. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
really
been really
it's
neat.
really cool.
That is so cool. Yeah, I'll say that Sally was the favorite 2nd grade teacher
Yeah.
ever
Aw.
in Utah. She taught 2nd grade.
Oh, I believe that.
Yeah.
So
I see
then,
that.
did you go straight to entrepreneurship, Tim?
I
Remind
did,
me.
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
No, I started with a partner. I started that iPhone cover business. It was called iWrap while we were at BYU, and kept it going a few years after graduation.
Cool.
So
So what have
I've
you
always-
what have you loved? Yeah, about entrepreneurship. What have you learned in entrepreneurship? What are some of your takeaways, guys?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what's funny is a lot of time you hear about entrepreneurship, like the reason people go into entrepreneurship is that they want the freedom. And my experience, you can see where I'm going with this.
The devil's hobby
Yeah,
is
yeah.
not freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, the devil's.
I mean, I think it can enable. I mean, in certain businesses, perhaps
Yeah.
while you're doing it, it can enable freedom. But I think for the most part, the freedom is deferred. Potentially for years or decades. And so, the downside. The downside obviously is that it can be very consuming. It can be very stressful. The upsides are, but they're there too. There is an immense sense of gratification when you create something, when you're able to employ people and give meaningful work. There's obviously the potential for a financial windfall or payoff as well. So there's a lot to be said for it. I think when we first met, I had a more naive view of entrepreneurship, that it was sort of the best way.
Yeah.
That if anybody was really ambitious, or really wanted to be successful, they were going to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And now I've changed my view on that entirely.
Yeah.
Like I do think entrepreneurship is the path for some people, and for other people, there's immense meaning to be found in other lines of work. I do think almost certainly everyone needs to find their own creativity and their own spark, but I absolutely believe that you can do that by joining another organization of some type, whether it's a business or nonprofit or whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree. I found early in my career, and this wasn't good, like I tried to convert everyone to entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
like
that's
I tried to
exactly.
make everyone an entrepreneur. Like I'd be with Jeff and Jamie, my 2 partners, and we'd be interviewing someone for a job, and I'd be like, you should really be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
They'd be like, what are you doing? We're trying to hire this person. I'd be like, what about this, this, and this? Like, because I just thought it was the most excellent way. And by the way, I think it is for me. It was for
Right.
me. It's almost a condition. I feel like I had Scott Paul on a couple episodes ago. Scott probably a little bit. It's kind of a condition, I think, for him as well. Like I couldn't imagine not being an entrepreneur. That's just who I am. But what's interesting, I have converted some friends. I have helped a lot of friends become entrepreneurs. Most of them have loved it and done well, but some of them don't realize, like, it never goes away. When
Right.
you're an entrepreneur, it never leaves. You're never really on. This is what I say. I travel all around the world a lot, and people see that sometimes. I'm never not working.
Right.
I'm always working, no matter where I'm at, no matter what I'm doing. I am constantly on. And this is something that you may not realize if you have a job and you're actually able to go home at night. That doesn't really happen in entrepreneurship, especially in either a fast-growing company or one that's really struggling.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's something
totally.
you don't realize, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think there's there's the boundaries portion of it where you can stop working, but like it's almost. This is one of my maybe regrets about the way I've handled it. Like I do think for a lot of years I was like, okay, even though this business is sort of my entire career, like all of my potential success is wrapped up in this career-wise. I didn't want to leave the family behind, and so I'd say, okay, I get into work at 8 and I leave at 6, and I'm there in the evening. And I for a lot of years I did that, but it's impossible for me. I think maybe other people have better, like, are able to segment their lives a little bit better, but like to like leave the weight of it.
Yeah.
And I brought that home for sure for many years on Aubrey, and there's no question that she felt that, and I'm sure my kids felt it to some extent too. And so it's definitely been a trade-off in our in our family.
But I think that's one of the gifts, it is a school of personal development, like learning to have internal boundaries when other people are depending on you. It's one thing if it's your own reputation that you're risking. I mean, I'm sure in every career people are depending on you, but it really felt like this is someone's livelihood that you are risking by choosing to take Memorial Day off or whatever, whatever, like bank holiday we wanted to not work for.
To shoot off fireworks the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Should I be working?
Yep.
Yeah. And so it was really a practice in finding balance and in setting boundaries that were healthy, but and not overly risky, but also, not taking for granted that somebody else is going to suffer by your decisions. And I think it's also the other gift was just like learning to not be attached to this idea of success all the time. Like everything was so uncertain. It was so up and down. And during the Cortex years, I remember just like that you could come into that situation, have these conversations, and it was like it's going to work out. Like this isn't the end of the world. Like if this thing crashes and burns, like you just move on and like something else will come along. And that was really like a new adventure for us. And we were so young. It felt like this was like the end of everything.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes. And so that's been a way that I think we've really grown over the years, that like there are ups and downs, and you can fail and there's something after failure. And so it's okay to lose it. Like it's okay to take bigger risks and like have different seasons.
Yeah, that's awesome. You got, and this is what I hope is happening to the listeners as well. I just had an insight as you guys were speaking that I've never had before. I want to share it real quickly, ask you about it, but I hope this is what's happening to people as they listen. I think that I struggle with boundaries with other people because, by the way, I have no boundaries in terms of my life. Like I have been always on because I've always been an entrepreneur. I've been always available because I felt like I had to. And so therefore, when someone else isn't, I don't understand that lifestyle and that life. And I'm like, what do you mean you're not available, right? And like, it's hard for me to struggle. And I think I've had a couple people, one in my governor race and somewhere else, kind of say, like, where are the boundaries here? And it's like, everything blends and meshes together for me.
Right.
So that's an insight I just had. And I just want to ask one more question about boundaries, thoughts on boundaries, like healthy boundaries. This is something that I haven't explored a lot. I think I've struggled with maybe even not really knowingly. And it's because of who I am and the lifestyle that I've chosen to live. And I kind of impose that on other people or think that just everyone lives this way when in actuality they don't. And they don't want to get a call on Memorial Day or whatever. And I'm like, what do you mean?
No,
go
totally.
ahead.
I mean, I think Aubrey's got a lot to say here, but the one thing I will say is that I think it depends a lot on just who you are personality wise. And there is a certain personality type that both Aubrey and I fit into, which is the people pleaser. I would say we just like we want to make people happy, The
double people pleaser.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a good marriage? I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's a very accommodating marriage.
Very accommodating marriage.
It is. No, this is interesting. We actually could get into that. But the problem, I think one of the problems with not having strong boundaries, even as a people pleaser, is that if you end up saying yes to something that you want to say no to, then there is always resentment that goes along with that. And the person that made the request in the first place, the one that you didn't want to comply with what you did, but you did, is often unaware of the resentment that you feel toward them. Yeah. And so your relationship underneath the surface is, festering, but the other person, like, they didn't do anything wrong. They had no idea.
I think I have caused people to feel the fun, and I had no idea.
No, honestly. And obviously there are other personality types that are sort of the ask and ask and ask. And when they get paired up with somebody that is a sort of boundaryless people pleaser, that can become toxic on sort of both sides, where, the expectations of the asker, they expect them to always be met. Mm-hmm. So this is something like Aubrey and I at 21, like literally, if somebody asked us to do something, that meant we were doing it, period. Yeah. And only in the last few years have we learned to say no, which is like the scariest thing in the world. We're just like, oh, we're letting everyone down. And it's just like, it's really hard.
But you think it's healthy and important?
Yeah. And I was just going to say, I think pairing that with growing up in like very religiously, I think I interpreted messages at church to mean that selfishness looked like boundaries. And so I needed to not have any boundaries because that was selfish. And so it does lead to resentment. And I think what we've had to learn is that the only way to actually be a compassionate person is to have healthy boundaries. you know, and so that looks like saying you, and I think this is Brene Brown that always talks about you have to be free to say no to say yes. And so that has been our practice. Like, do I feel free to say no to this? And am I really saying, is this a true yes, or am I doing this out of fear? You know, and I think for a lot of my life, my yeses came out of fear. Like, if someone asked me something, like, I could not disappoint them. Like, that was untenable. It made me so anxious to imagine that kind of resistance. And it is so freeing to be able to say, that doesn't work for me. And I that's, you know, and that's a line. And people are totally respectful of that. I think I believed that they would feel pushed away and like there was this wedge in our relationship, and it is the opposite. Like, you have an authentic relationship, and I think you feel more connected when you can be really honest about your boundaries.
Oh gosh, selfishness. I think you're exactly right. I think that we think boundaries mean selfishness.
Right.
Like, I'm
Yes.
speaking in our culture, and that can go far and wide outside of Utah potentially. But yeah, I totally agree. Like, that's a really interesting insight.
And part of, I think, developing strong boundaries is tapping into your own personal authority. And I think in the Latter-day Saint faith tradition that we share, like, one of the things we do really well, and it sometimes has unintended side effects, is that we do have a lot of respect for authority. And so, like, as a young person, especially growing up in that sort of faith, like, we're looking to our elders and our leaders for guidance. And I think that's great to have that kind of respect for somebody that has experience beyond what you have. But sometimes culturally, I think we can also take it a little bit too far, and we're always looking for somebody outside of ourselves to determine what's right for us. And again, like, this is something that literally in our mid-30s.
This is so rich.
Yeah, like, literally in our mid-30s, we're still, like, figuring this out. And it's just like, why do I think that? Wait a second, I don't think that. That person thinks that, you know? And it's just it's a really different thing once you start to respect what you feel, you know, is right deep inside of you.
I love that. Yeah, I'm in my mid-40s still trying to figure it out. So you guys are a decade ahead.
I don't know about that.
Let me ask one more question about entrepreneurship, Tim, and then I want to ask Aubrey about Harvard. And this will kind of wrap up. So, you know, we had some devil's hobbies. We had some good successes.
Yep.
You know, I want to ask you a question, so prepare yourself, that I don't think I've ever asked you.
Oh, here we go.
That might be a little vulnerable. It is vulnerable for me, too. I'm just curious. So Tim went to Harvard, and we're going to talk about that. But Tim, I was really grateful that when you got out of Harvard, or when you were finishing up, you decided, you know, halfway through your time or 18 months through your time at Harvard, I'm going to start another business. I am an entrepreneur. I'm going to do it again. And I think I was your first call, or at least your first call potentially for funding. Why? So I'm going to ask you a hard question. So why? And I appreciated that. And let me just say, while you're thinking and say, thank you for calling me back. You know, like, we had some ups and downs, mainly ups, but we'd always maintained a great relationship and had fun even when we were struggling, which is the right way to do it, I think. But I was so grateful that you called me back. And by the way, so we were able to, in our venture fund, fund Tim's startup. He has now successfully exited that startup. It's not totally public, so we won't talk about the details there, but you will have heard of this exit and what's going on there. And so Tim's found great success now after a long journey. So to wrap up the entrepreneur, why did you call me? And I appreciate it, man. I
mean, it goes, of course. And this is something I probably should have told you this, or written you a thank you note or something that said this instead of having the conversation right now. But
we don't have to have
like,
it right now.
I mean, it goes back to, I think, so we should talk about, potentially we could get into Jonathan Haidt and The Righteous Mind. He talks about several different sort of areas of morality that people, like, focus on. I think there are six different areas. One of them that he talks about is loyalty. And what I think I saw in you, Jeff, within the first, 6 months, year of working together, was that for whatever reason we had a bond, and you were loyal to me and I was loyal to you. Mm-hmm. And that loyalty that I felt from you meant that you had my back no matter what, you know? And part of that, I mean, and obviously that relationship grows when you go through something difficult together, especially like we talked about with Cortex. And so I just felt, I felt strongly that you were going to back me, you know, whether that was financially or through mentorship or whatever. I didn't know that you were going to necessarily write a check from a business, you know, but like, it was an easy choice because I felt like Jeff Burningham is a person that believes in me and is going to have my back. And I've told Aubrey that many times. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what is true about Jeff, is that he's going to support me in whatever I'm doing. And so it was an easy call, obviously.
I appreciate that.
And no, I obviously, I can't thank you enough, because that backing from the very beginning turned into something that's meaningful, really meaningful for us and our team, our family. So.
And
Amen.
just like that vote of confidence, you know, not like you were saying, like not necessarily even the check, but I mean, I remember those conversations through business school that you were there, you know, emotionally, almost like we knew, like you would be up for whatever the idea was, and that I think mentally just that gave you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and the other thing, obviously, Jeff, is that having a vote of confidence from you. Led to a lot of votes of confidence from many other people. And obviously there are many people, both on the team side, on the investor side, that are involved in our story. You know, too difficult to name everybody here. Yeah. But just having that first vote of confidence, it can be in entrepreneurship and VC especially, like it can be sort of a cascading domino effect. And so that really helped.
Well, thanks, Tim. Number one, I really appreciate that answer. But number two, I asked it for our listeners. I really did. And you gave the perfect, hey, entrepreneurs, you can go through hard times with your mentors, with your investors, and the right ones will still back you. Yeah. They'll still be there with you. Yep. Like it's not over if you have tough times. Again, Tim and I have had tough business times and really good business times. That partnership between an entrepreneur and the right investor is something special, actually. And if you have the right investor, they will be with you kind of through thick and thin. I'm glad you felt that way. Yep. That's the type of investor I try to be. And my point in telling that story, and thank you so much, Tim, is to say, don't give up on your investors, don't give up on your entrepreneurs, and stick with it through thick and thin.
Absolutely.
Because oftentimes on this podcast, I talk about no life is straight and to the right constantly, you know, like every life is up and down. And
100%.
I want to ask about, you guys grew up in Harvard, kind of, I'm just going to say high school sweethearts. You met in 7th grade during the awkward stage, which is awesome.
Yep.
And then you go all the way to Boston. I mean, you guys are from Utah. Like I didn't grow up in Utah. I came here to school at BYU. I didn't grow up here. You go all the way to Boston. Boston is a different place. I'm sure you'd been there before, but Harvard is a very liberal and awesome school. Aubrey, what was this like for you and your family? You know, how did the decision get made to go to MBA school and to go to Harvard? And then tell us about that 2-year experience or whatever from your perspective.
So I remember being like very drawn when acceptance letters were coming in. I had my heart set on Harvard. Like I wanted to go to Boston. And I think it was just that it felt like a different culture. Like California felt more familiar, and like I feel like I understood that world, but Boston just felt so foreign. And I don't even remember deciding. It was just like, as soon as that letter came, it was like, yes,
that's the
like
place.
That's where we're going. Yeah. And it felt like another country. It felt so different. It was so like culturally opposite of anything that we knew. And I think when you get immersed in something that different, like there's just nothing more like growth stimulating. Like there's nothing richer for your brain than to just like be in totally out of your element, and you don't know anyone, and every experience is new. It's just there's just nothing that compares to that. It was such a cool 2 years to just make all new friends and make friends who were not from our world, you know, like people who were just had a totally different life experience. And I just can't imagine another way to like understand people than just like go living with them and being in this new place together, and being, you know, everybody needs friends. Like everybody shows up and nobody knows anyone. So it's such a cool experience because your neighbors it's a fresh start for them too. And so everybody is so open. It's like everybody's looking for friends. Yeah. And then just to experience like the history of Boston and to be in this place that is older than, you know, in Utah, or older than all the buildings are older than Utah's buildings. And, you know, we go back to pioneers and we're looking at like Revolutionary War stuff in Boston. It was just such an adventure to have. We had these 2 little kids, and to get to just like, we'd head out every day with sandwiches and like come home at night. And you know, while Tim was at school, I was like taking the tea and like just like walking around the city. Awesome. And it was such an incredible experience. And also, you know, I was grateful that we had a time limit, that we knew we were going to be there for 2 years, so we could enjoy every minute and know that we were going to come home to parking lots and like easy to like places where it was easy to drive and there's no traffic and like nobody gives you a look for having multiple children.
Don't get Aubrey started on the humidity.
That's what I said. Get rid of the humidity.
Yeah, I couldn't take the humidity. But yeah, it was just, and also like, I loved our experience just in the church, like just being in a new ward and hearing experiences that were in some ways familiar because it's, you know, it's the same gospel and you're showing up and you're doing church the same way, but just people showed up differently and in a way that really expanded my mind. And I think it was really important for my own growth.
Yeah.
Cool.
I had the same experience. I think seeing, for one thing, again, coming from Utah, where the majority of people that I knew and interacted with were Latter-day Saints, seeing people, you can, and I don't think everyone has this perspective. It was mostly me as a naive, young person. But like thinking that experience, being part of a particular organization, a particular church, sort of means that you've mostly got stuff to share and less to learn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And going out there and seeing people that didn't know anything about our faith, who were so deeply good and so much better in basically every way than I was.
Yeah.
It sort of meant like, okay, like I don't have it all. There's a lot out there that I maybe stop focusing so much on like what you have to learn from me and a lot more on what I have to learn from you.
Amen to that. Like as I've traveled the world, Sally and I've traveled over 50 countries. That is the overwhelming feeling I get.
Really?
It doesn't matter. Oh yeah. It doesn't matter if I'm in the Middle East with Muslims or where, in India with Hindus. The sense that I get is that, again, we're all fellow travelers. We're all trying to figure out. We all have pains, we all have a lot to teach each other. And in fact, I find that religious orthodoxy oftentimes somehow shaves off some of that grace or that kindness, and that's what I think you were recognizing. This is what I've recognized as I've gone to other countries and had a bunch of different experiences. For whatever reason that our culture or that religious orthodoxy, I'll just say, that we all kind of grew up with, shaves off some of that grace and kindness. And when you recognize that in someone else, it's like, oh, there's the light that I'm looking for. Oh, there's what really matters. Like I've been missing the mark around all these rules and whatever, regulations, and this is how we do it, and blah, 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 bureaucracy. But this is what matters. Is that what you're sensing?
I mean, it's exhilarating to recognize that in someone, to hear somebody express something that resonates with you, but it's in a completely different language. Like they're using words that aren't familiar, but they are describing something something you've totally experienced and felt. That is the most exhilarating experience, I think. Just like making that kind of connection, but that they're coming at it from their own completely foreign experience.
Hey guys, it's Jeff. Thank you so much for listening to the Extraordinary Us podcast. There's a lot of momentum behind the podcast right now, and we are so excited. I've got a special guest with me for a second here, my wife, Sally.
Hello, good to be here.
Why are you here, Sal?
We're starting a new podcast together, which I am super excited about. It is called Under Our Bed.
And we are literally people under our bed recording
We
right
are
now.
sitting right under our bed.
And if you want to hear more about why we called it Under Our Bed, tune in to our first episode, wherever you get your podcasts, because we're going to explain what it means. We hope to have candid and meaningful conversations together about issues that are relevant to you today.
Absolutely.
Good night, Sal.
Good night.
So you're at Harvard. You have a lot of opportunities to potentially work somewhere, go somewhere else. You decide to come back home to Utah to do entrepreneurship. And again, I'm pivoting to, and did you decide or did you think you're going to do something about your faith? And by the way, this podcast is for people of any faith and religion, or those not of faith. I think we all can learn from each other. And this is an interesting story, I believe.
Yeah.
Did you decide that you were going to dive into that? I know that you started writing, if I remember, like blogging or whatever. Was that the start of it? Or how did this Faith Matters come to be? And again, you guys are now on the board. You're doing the podcast. Tell us a little bit of that genesis and how that came to be.
So the genesis, I would say, is actually a few years before we moved to Boston. And it started with what I think people are terming in current language a faith crisis. Right?
And I think that's how it felt. That's how I definitely would have described it.
Yeah, some
that year.
people push back against the term crisis, but it can what we, at least in our experience, what we felt did feel like a crisis.
Can I clarify one thing on that? When you say, I think most people understand what you're saying when you say a faith crisis, but was this like a faith crisis, let's say a faith in God or a higher power crisis, or was this a crisis of your own religious upbringing, like the religion that you grew? I'm curious.
For me, it started with religion in particular, and then it sort of cascades from there.
Mine too, exactly, yeah.
I think our story is maybe not anything particularly special here, but you start to in our tradition specifically. But actually, now that we've talked about this with so many people outside of our tradition, that it does map in so many ways.
Oh, yeah.
People have this experience in every religion and tradition. But for us, obviously, looking at historical issues, social issues, those types of things, you start to wonder, like, is everything that I've been taught, actually the right path? Is it true? And that's a I air quote there because, it can mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
And there is a big question, I think, about what the word true really, can mean used in this context. And it started with me, I think is being fair. And I like suppressed it, pretty bad for maybe 6 to 12 months. And I was looking at, I was doing a bunch of research, like looking online, like I'd have a specific question about something that was bothering me and then look up what they call apologetics, meaning like these are defenders of the faith who, tackle specific questions and try to give good answers. And I was not buying everything I was reading. And it was really starting to canker a little bit. And after several months, I can't remember exactly how long, I decided I felt like, and this again goes back to like a very different mindset, but I felt like I needed to confess these feelings of a doubt that I was having to Aubrey. And I was actually very worried about how she was going to react. I thought, potentially if I told her that if I didn't know that, again, to use the sort of common language, that our church was true, that she might have a pretty adverse reaction. Like it might be
Like she might punch you in the face.
Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, but when you love someone and you're, and your foundation together is built on sort of this common ground, and that common ground could slip away in some way. Yeah. Then like, what does that mean for the relationship? Yeah. And I did eventually bring it up to her. I remember we were driving on the freeway, and I was like, okay, here we go. And I told her, like, I literally, the words I said were, I don't know if the church is true. And that like scared me to even say those words out loud. I was like, what is this going to be? And she put her hand on my hand and said, that's totally okay. Like, we're going to go through this together. Yeah. And like, that's awesome, Aubrey. Oh my gosh. It was the most meaningful thing in the world to me, because and it sort of goes back to that loyalty, that we were talking about in the first place, to feel that from someone, that they have your back no matter what, regardless of what, regardless of the trials that you're going through, regardless of where your mindset's at, you have someone that's truly on your side. That changes your whole perspective. And so then the fear of what I was feeling went away, and it became much more exploratory from there. Mm. So I don't know if you want to pick up the story, but
yeah. I mean, I always feel bad, like imagining him, with that much fear, like really being that uncertain about like what it would mean for our marriage. Yeah. But I really think that is indicative of our worldview at that time. Like it was, I mean, everything was built on this like knowledge. Like it was in some ways like a badge of honor. Like, and we had always been so in, like we were the kids that checked every box. And, we had such good friends all through high school. We had like opposite peer pressure. Like you wouldn't mess up because we had so much peer pressure from these good friends that were like keeping you in line. Yeah. And so it felt, it really rocked my world. Like it was a slow motion moment to just be like, what? Like Tim could have uncertainty.
Did you have
here?
any sense of this like going on before this?
He had this sounds so stupid now, but he had started reading Rough Stone Rolling, and I was like,
so this is a biography of Joseph Smith,
which you can buy at Desert Book. Like Richard Bushman he's like a patriarch, I think, right now. Like, he's not. This is not like anti-Mormon literature, but I remember being like, ooh, I don't know. Like, we gotta be careful about like what we're like. It's not LDS.org or what. That's not even the real thing now. Yeah. Anyway, but he was so vulnerable in that moment that the only thing I could feel was just like, I can see how he's really wrestling with this. And so I think had he come to me with like, I've been doing this research and there are, 8 serious problems with the history of the church, and like, here they are, and I'm going to take them off.
Yeah, here's my pamphlet.
Yeah. I think I would have felt so much resistance. That would have been so amygdala triggering. I think I would have been on the defend the church train. But because he was so vulnerable and open in that moment, all I could feel was like, whatever this is, like, I don't understand it, but I know I totally trust him and love him. And like, if this is what he's experiencing, like, this is legit. This is not about like he wants to sin, or like he's lazy, or like, this was so real. And so I think just because of the way he approached it, it was so much easier to just like not feel so threatened.
Yeah. And again, for all our listeners that aren't members of this faith, you may have experienced something similar in your life, right? I sat with actually Kurt Frankham from Leading Saints here like a week ago. And it was fun. He interviewed me for the podcast. And I asked him actually a question. I flipped on him and said, what do you think the church is known for around the world? My point is, one of the things that we both agreed on was strong families. So I think one of the reasons that you guys, it is so intertwined, right? Like the family, our spouse, our children, our parents and siblings is so intertwined with our faith, right? And so it can feel so earth-shattering or shaking when you have questions about this. Mike, but do you think this is a natural process? Again, I'm mid-40s. As I go to midlife or whatever it is, I find my faith changing and growing. And by the way, maybe not even in a bad way, right? And I assume that whatever your faith may be, this may be a similar journey. You mentioned that.
Totally.
Do you agree with that now? And take us through a little bit some of the steps you guys have been through kind of in this faith journey of how you're thinking about things or looking at things differently and how that's strengthened you and helped you.
Well, I think one good place to start would be there are so many actual like frameworks for this that have been developed by very wise people across time and across faith traditions. One of my, Richard Rohr.
I love that.
He's got the first half of life, second half of life framework, which I think is sort of the simplest one, where the first half of life is very, authority based, obedience based, certainty based, and it's a healthy first half of life. He says is totally necessary. Yeah. Like you need to have some sort of strong framework, even if for the purpose of eventually becoming something to push against, instead of just sort of floating out there. And the second half of life then becomes more based on internal authority, on love, on uncertainty in some ways, on sort of non-binary thinking, and seeing all sides of an issue. But actually our favorite framework is from a guy, and I should speak for myself here. My favorite framework is from a guy named Brian McLaren. He's a former evangelical pastor. He wrote a book that was released just in the last year called Faith After Doubt. And the reason we like it so much is that it maps with our own experience so perfectly. And so he has faith journeys broken up into 4 stages. The first is simplicity. Simplicity meaning.
I love this, by the way. Like I'm literally looking down, taking notes. Keep going. Faith After Doubt.
Yeah. So simplicity is basically black and white thinking.
Yeah.
This is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false.
Which seems like that has to be kind of a framework. You start as a child, and there's got to be.
And that's a healthy way.
Either you're floating and nothing is anything, or you have some black and white boundaries.
And sometimes, totally. And we've even tried to like give our kids like nuance too early, and I think sometimes, and they like push back so hard against like
they're not ready for that.
Well, and they will become black and white about the nuance. Like then we've just presented them with a new black and white issue.
Totally
like
true.
Now it's the only right way is to be nuanced. And so it is something they have to grow through. Like they've got to start at black and white. That's just and that's healthy and great.
Yeah.
So simplicity.
Yeah, and I should preface by saying all of the developers of these frameworks would 100% push back on the idea that any stage is better than any other stage. They sort of are what they are. And they, to some extent, they do represent stages of maturity, but there are healthy expressions of each stage. And I think they all serve their own purposes. Mm-hmm. Even when someone moves into another stage, it would be unhealthy if they didn't take the best things of the previous stage of maturity with them. And so anybody that's hearing this and hearing any judgment about any of these stages, I don't think I really don't want that to be the case, and I want to make clear that I think I, in many ways, inhabit all of the stages, and in different contexts of my life, I'm in more in one than in another.
Got it.
But so post simplicity is what Brian McLaren calls complexity, and so that, and I think actually apologetics that we were talking about, like these really complex answers to tough questions, is a perfect expression of complexity, where it's like, okay, this isn't simple. Like there's a lot going on here, but if you just dig hard enough, research hard enough, try hard enough, you're going to come up with, in the end, the perfect answer to this question.
And I think this is where a lot of churches thrive, this space where, you're coming up with systems for success. Like these are 3 steps that will help you to do this thing better.
Yeah, this is where handbooks
Handbooks.
Handbooks.
Yes,
Yep.
handbooks. And, like when we were doing personal progress, like what better example of this complexity stage. Like here's all these chapters and then multiple headings, and you're going to set a goal, and then you're going to do this thing for 3 weeks, and like it is a system of complexity, which is so healthy for that age, or for whatever when you're in that stage. Like that is such a healthy thing to be doing. But that's what it looks like. It looks like programs and progress, and
which is so hard,
goals.
And there's where the bureaucracy comes in, right? And I love Richard Rohr's thinking about this. And remind me, was he an angelic?
He's Catholic. He's a
Franciscan
friar.
friar.
Yep.
That's right. Okay. But this is where the bureaucracy comes in, though, and it's kind of like, let me just say, kind of putting man in front of you and your relationship with God, right? Which is
that's a
really
good point.
hard, right? Like
Yeah.
I think so. But keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you have a real external authority at that point. Like when someone asks you what you believe, you're going to give them a quote from
Someone.
a general authority, or from somebody who you think
From
has
the
more
Pope.
authority.
Yep.
From the
Whatever,
yeah. That's what your answers will sound like.
Yep, totally. And I fully inhabited this stage personally on my mission. I think like I memorized a scripture almost every day of my mission. It was like, and like was looking for like the deepest connections, all of those things. And for many years after, the faith crisis part that we've described briefly, I think was me entering into Brian McLaren's next stage, which is called complexity. Perplexity. Yes, thank you. Perplexity.
It's a very simple
confusing.
framework, people. Like just very
complexity
simple.
followed by complexity.
Dude,
followed by more
we've
complexity.
gotten deep here. Like we started so jovial, and now we're like, this is okay. Now we're into Harvard, PhD, Tim Chaves. Okay, perplexity.
Okay, so perplexity is where, I mean, to put it simply, everything sort of falls apart. So you've gone deep into complexity, and the answers aren't necessarily working for you. The frameworks you don't think are working. And instead of just saying, okay, I'm gonna take out of my life the things that aren't working for me, you sort of start to deconstruct everything. You question everything you've ever learned, all of the authority figures you've ever revered.
So this is where you're at when you talk to Aubrey.
Yeah, I'm entering perplexity for sure. And it's probably the hardest stage, I would say, by far, the most emotionally challenging.
Yeah, this is where you're most likely to feel really angry or devastated, or it just feels like your world is falling apart. So James Fowler has another really popular framework, and his equivalent stage is stage 4, and he calls it you have a leaving home experience. So for a lot of people this happens in college, like they are literally leaving home, but for LDS they're going on missions and they're getting married and they're sort of like retrenching. So a lot of times this doesn't happen until your 30s or 40s, and it's a lot more disruptive at that point. And so it can feel really negative for somebody who's been in that complexity stage for a long time, and then in middle adulthood moves through this.
That's awesome. I appreciate that explanation, and I don't know anything about this framework, never heard it before, but I want to guess what stage 4 is, or I hope what it is. It's probably not.
Please.
Serenity, please.
Oh my gosh, that's really close.
It should go from complexity to serenity, right?
Okay,
but go ahead.
This is so
This
interesting.
what I would say.
Brian McLaren talked about how he had several different names for stage 4. Was Serenity one of them?
I think it was something about peace.
Yeah.
I mean,
So he calls it harmony.
Harmony. Okay.
But I
think
get
Serenity's
points for that. They
better.
take that on.
Yeah.
And so,
because that's kind of what I feel, by the way, I am entering into. And I'm trying to inhabit, and I think you guys are
I
in
think
the
so
same place.
too.
Like I'm trying to be in this, and I'd call it like this serenity. But go ahead,
yeah,
Tim,
I think
explain to us.
I think
definition
on
of it.
my best days, I somewhat inhabit this stage, and that's not always.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the reasons that harmony, can work as a title for it is that it does integrate all the different previous stages. Like, but they work together instead of sort of like being in contrast, with one another. The title of the book where he lays out this framework, like I said, is Faith After Doubt, and that's where harmony really starts to come in. Is like what he says. He says it in such a beautiful way, but faith before doubt for Brian looks like correct beliefs, and faith after doubt simply looks like love. And so yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Love is the answer.
Love is the answer.
Yeah.
And I think so. What he would say is that doubt has been sort of an accompanying, companion all along, even if you didn't realize it. It took you from simplicity to complexity because you realized there needed to be something a little bit more. Yeah. It took you from complexity into perplexity because you're saying, I don't know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And then you realize that there has to be some sort of order, even if it didn't look like what it looked like before, that takes you out of perplexity into harmony. And like I said, I think I am very reluctant to say, oh, here I am, like I'm a model for this stage 4. Like I don't think that's the case at all. But and I think all of us like I said, inhabit this in different contexts and in different times. But on my best days now, where I'm able to feel this harmony stage inside of me, I'm able to look at everyone regardless of what stage they're in. And obviously I can't judge what stage they're in, but regardless of what stage I think they're in, and feel absolute love toward them and appreciation for what they're bringing to the table.
Amen. I love this conversation because I feel like faith is this is something we all grapple with. Everyone, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, you have to wrestle with this question, or these questions. Is there life after death? Am I here for a purpose? Is there a higher power? What am I here to do on earth? And so these fundamental questions, I think, are something that we all grapple with, no matter our faith tradition or no tradition at all. I could talk with you guys about this forever, and I mean that sincerely. And we kind of have done that at times, Tim, at lunch.
100%.
But I want to try. So Aubrey, purpose of faith matters. So bring this journey to because even I, who have listened to the podcast some and know you guys and know Terrell and know Bill Turnbull, one of the founders, and what is the purpose of Faith Matters? Sum up, what are we, and maybe, I know it's probably forming, it's kind of a startup, right? So you're you don't know what is the purpose of Faith Matters? Why is it here? How can people find it? Why are you involved, Aubrey?
So, well, I can tell you how we kind of in the middle of this, what became clear was that, when apologetics weren't really working, we realized that we weren't looking for an answer. It just started becoming more clear that there really wasn't going to be a great answer. Nobody was going to be able to come and prove to us God, at the end of the day, that was a fact. Nobody could convince us one way or another. And we heard Terrell Givens speaking somewhere about that exact fact, that the point of faith is that there is uncertainty. If you were compelled to believe in all of these things, then there would be no faith. And he compared it to gravity, that every single time you drop something, it's going to fall. And so you're compelled to believe in gravity, because there's never an instance where that's not going to happen. And faith can't be that way. There have to be equal reasons to believe and not to believe. And that kind of just blew my mind open in the best way. And it made me realize that we could keep studying these issues and learning, but at the end of the day, we were going to have to make a decision, and God wasn't going to compel us to think one way or another. And so we got connected with Faith Matters through Terrell, just because we kind of been following his work closely, and Fiona. And then Tim kind of just said, we love this space and we want to help, and
we're here to
started
volunteer.
Putting us to work.
And they said, great, we need volunteers.
No, exactly.
And I think maybe the easiest way to sum up what their goal is just to create a more expansive Mormonism. And to, instead of feeling like if you have a faith crisis, you got to choose if you're in or out. We don't need that word anymore. It would, I think in a perfect world, people wouldn't feel like it was a crisis. It would just feel like growth. We could be growing together and asking questions together, and not have this crisis of feeling like if we're allowed to stay or not. And so that, I think that's kind of how I see what we're doing. Let's have conversations that just expand our borders.
I just want to say this again. I love this conversation, and I do, because I'm actually thinking of it now politically. We are so tribalistic right now. We get into our tribes, whether it's religious or ethnicity or politics, and we somehow see the other as less than human, or what do you mean? What are you talking about? Again, this is kind of hitting at the purpose of this podcast, which is we are all in this together, people. Remember that in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day actions, in your words, how you treat others. And if we all did that, obviously, the world would be a better place. We'd have more peace. Others would have more peace. And our world is not at peace right now.
100%.
Brian McLaren talks about that. This is a human problem. This is not a faith. It's not a religious problem. This is whatever tribe you start in, you're gonna go through these stages of development.
I love that. Well, I love the good work that you're doing at Faith Matters. What's next there? I mean, anything, or what would you like people to check out? The podcast?
Yeah.
I've been uplifted by several of these podcasts. You cover really interesting topics. I've texted you, Tim, several times and said, hey, man, I love this, or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
What's coming next? What are the future plans? Yeah,
for sure. So I'd say the first place, everything that we do will have a place on faithmatters.org. So that's the place to go if you want to check out either the podcast or other content that we're producing. So our main sort of initiatives right now are the podcast. So we're releasing basically weekly. we've started a book publisher as well. We've published 2 books so far, one by Fiona and Terrell Givens and one by Patrick Mason, who's a historian up at the U.
What are those called?
Yes, the Fiona and Terrell Givens book is called All Things New.
Yep.
And
Which
the
I
Patrick,
read is awesome.
Yes, the Patrick Mason book is called Restoration.
Okay, I haven't
And
read that
both
yet.
of them focus on sort of reworking language in a way
Yes.
that a lot of times, and this is not a criticism on the church at all, but just culturally, we've inherited a lot of like unhealthy
Yes.
words and unhealthy tradition,
Yeah.
and they've just come down, and it's
We
just
just
the air
kind of
we
accept
breathe.
them. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
who we are.
Yeah, totally.
But it's like, why? Why are we like this? Why
Yes.
do we say these things? Why do we not talk about grace? I spoke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyways, why do we not talk about grace more? It's not part of our
Yes.
vocabulary, and it sure
Right.
should be.
Yes.
Anyways,
Totally.
because we all need that grace.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what we feel when you guys had that conversation in your car. I think I would guess, Tim, that one of the main words you would use to describe what you felt from Aubrey was like grace.
100%. Yeah.
And that grace is divine. And when you feel that from another human being, that is transformative.
Yeah.
And you so rarely, I'll say, having been a hard-charging entrepreneur, competing, having ran for governor, having whatever, you so rarely feel that grace,
Yeah.
really, or at least
Yeah.
I have in my everyday life, and it's sad, it's damaging, it's hard, it's hurtful.
I think that grace is a perfect word to describe it because what it implies is that it's something that you don't deserve because of anything that
gift.
you've done.
Yeah.
It's a gift. And I did absolutely 100% feel that from Aubrey. And like you're saying, even in the world of politics or in the world of religion or whatever, the more grace we can extend to each other, the less transactional our relationships become. Like, I need this from you in order to give you something back. It's just sort of a chicken and egg problem. Like, grace gets rid of the chicken and egg problem, right? Because I'm going to freely give regardless of what's happened from your side.
And whatever comes back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do feel
exactly.
that that conditional love is a component of
Yeah.
our culture and of most religious cultures,
Yeah.
right? It's like very conditional. But anyways, I want to cover one more important topic quickly if we can.
Yeah.
So hold on, listeners. This is it. But this is, and I'm going to forego some of the normal questions that I ask people. But I want to talk a little bit about mental health. It's been a critical year. I had a therapist on a couple episodes ago, Paul George, who I, by the way, have seen from time to time and has become a good friend. It's obviously something we're a lot more aware of via COVID, et cetera. And Tim, I know that you've, from afar, I kind of have observed and know that you have struggled a little bit with OCD and
That's
some
right.
other things at times. Let's talk about mental health in terms of your family, in terms of what you've learned and what advice you might have for listeners during this very difficult time where we're actually thinking, which I think is great. Even, Jon Huntsman Jr., I loved it, on the campaign trail, was pounding and talking about mental health
Yeah.
here in the state of Utah and how it's such a critical issue.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute to wrap up.
Well, I think, I think there is a legitimate mental health crisis going on in this country. Like, one of the articles that I always remember is from Jean Twenge, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in The Atlantic, where basically it coinciding almost perfectly with the rise of smartphones in teenagers' hands, anxiety and depression just absolutely skyrocketed.
Ugh, doesn't this make you guys so? I
It's
hate
absolutely
this.
scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, like you said, I have struggled with mental health. I didn't know what to call it for a long time. And my struggle in particular has been with OCD. It's too big of a topic probably to tackle 100% right now. But I do think one thing that our culture is doing pretty well, but we could be doing even better, is getting rid of the stigma around mental health conversations, around seeing therapists, and even around approaching medication if nothing else has really worked. All of those things have been involved in our family, for the better. I do think it can be surprising if you've never been to a therapist. It's easy to sort of discount it, like, what's that really going to do? But I would just say that therapists are specifically trained with specific techniques. It's not woo woo. It's like this is actually scientific, and specific types of thought patterns and conversations and changes in the way that you approach your anxiety in this case, or OCD in my case, actually make a huge difference. When I'll just give one example. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And I've shared this before, but actually when I wrote one of my essays to get into business school, I had a friend edit it. And as part of the editing process, he came back with a little turn of phrase, 3 or 4 words that weren't mine, and I thought they were great. I included it in the essay, and I sent it in. Ended up getting accepted, and within, I don't know, a couple of weeks, I had that memory that like I had gone through this editing process, and I was like, oh my gosh, I cheated on my application. And this is OCD. Like OCD, it's funny. It's funny now.
Yeah, call me Tim. Just water under the bridge, bro. Just keep moving forward.
Yeah, but OCD, and this happens with all types of things in people that suffer from OCD. But I could not let this go. And to the point that I was going to call or email the dean of admissions and be like, hey, just so you know. And I started telling Aubrey about this plan. She's like, you're not doing that. Like, that's insane. And so
but that is the nature. That is OCD, right? Like that is the intrusive thought. That
obsessive
is what
compulsive
OCD,
disorder, right?
That's the obsession.
That was the obsession.
That was the obsession.
Yeah, totally. And I had very much resisted. I had sort of put the pieces together that I probably had OCD prior to this time, but I'd always resisted going to therapy. And I would just say, and to make this sort of like specific topic or this specific conversation more general, having Aubrey then essentially force me to go to therapy was the turning point in my own mental health.
And sorry, when was this? Was this
This is
pre-business school?
This is pre-business
business?
school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like basically it was the timing. Instead of calling a dean of admissions and saying like I did this or like I'm not going or whatever.
You had 2
Do you
options.
think I cheated?
Yeah, it was no, you're going to therapy. And so I went weekly for several months prior to business school, and my entire mentality changed.
Wow.
And I was given practices and techniques that I use literally on a daily basis to this point. When new compulsions or new obsessions, try to raise their ugly heads, like I have what I learned back in 2013 to help me with that. And so again, trying to make this more general, therapy is so key for people that are struggling with depression, with anxiety, with OCD, with suicidality, all of those things. Please, please, please don't let the stigma get to you. You are normal. So many people suffer from some type of mental health issue. I still feel the stigma. It's hard for me to talk about this. I'm very self-conscious, like thinking about all the people that are going to be listening to this right now.
Tim, we didn't need to talk.
No.
No,
but
it's so important though. Like
I feel like it's important too.
So I just want to preach that gospel. A, you're not alone, and so many people are going through this, and B, there is actually something that you can do about it.
I was just going to say, I think the tricky thing though is that we have a lot of language that hides anxiety and depression, and a lot of it is religious. And so you can go, I think, for lots of your life giving your depression words like godly sorrow or guilt, and it's, you need to repent, or your anxiety, just same thing, like this is guilt and this is or selfishness, and like you can hide and not realize that what other people are calling anxiety and guilt, you have created a religious vocabulary. One
big one is a prompting, like a spiritual prompting.
Oh my gosh, a prompting, like that is OCD.
That could be a compulsion
for us.
It's just like, oh, I need to do this very specific
I need to go
thing
lock
right
the door.
now.
Is the oven off?
I hope there are like 100 people that I know that are listening to this right now.
Yeah.
Well,
the thing is
that I'm very close to.
You know what's amazing is like,
and we all struggle with it, right? Like again, we're all struggling. This is the point.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously mental health issues are very widespread, but somewhere from like 1 to 3 people out of 100 actually suffer from OCD specifically. And so that's like, out of the number of you people there's probably a dozen, like that pretty well. And so it's a pretty big issue. And like Aubrey said, we sometimes don't get the help we need because we have other explanations for what's actually going on.
But I think this is a litmus test. We talked to Bonnie Young a couple of weeks ago, and she's a therapist that works specifically, not exclusively, but often with LDS people who have OCD. And something that she said I think was so helpful, because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't know that you're looking for OCD. You think everyone feels the way you feel because that's all you know. And so something that she said that I think is really helpful is that she says when she sees people overfunctioning, it's almost always a sign of anxiety. And when she sees people underfunctioning, there's almost always some underlying depression. So I think that's a good place to start. If you are overfunctioning in every area of your life and people are telling you that you're overfunctioning and it's normal for you, I think that's a good red flag. Like maybe that's a reason to just like go check in with a therapist and find out if there's something that could give you more peace.
This has been such a rich conversation, guys. It was so many layers, starting off with the devil's favorite hobby
exactly.
and ending with mental health. Aubrey, I'm going to give you the final word if we can here. Let's wrap up. Is there anything else that you'd like to share as we wrap up this episode? Any thoughts or feelings that maybe you weren't able to express?
Well, actually, the thing that comes to mind, because I think it actually, it relates to every single thing that we talk about. And I think that something that we have learned over the almost 15 years that we've had this adventure together, I think in entrepreneurship, in mental health, in the church, the thing that we have learned is acceptance of uncertainty. Like that seems like the answer. It's the answer with OCD, and it's the answer with testimony, and it's the answer with the wild ride of entrepreneurship. That if you can just accept uncertainty and have peace in uncertainty, then nothing disturbs you. You know, like there is real deep peace, like the peace that passeth all understanding. That is, to me, just total acceptance of uncertainty.
Amen, Aubrey and Tim Chaves.
Yes.
I appreciate your friendship.
We do too,
Thank
Jeff.
you so much.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
coming on today. It's been fun.
All right.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
ya. What a grab bag of interesting thoughts and feelings. It's great to be with good friends that have a history together, and I really respect the Chaveses in so many ways. We have had ups and downs in business, but it's ended well. You will have heard of the acquisition of Tim's company and a lot of exciting things going on by the time this is released. And I'm so excited for his success, but it hasn't always been that way. Do not fret, entrepreneurs. If you're in a good market and you have a good plan, things can turn around for you as well. I really love that talk about boundaries, and I want to apologize to anyone in my life, past, family and friends and coworkers. I haven't had boundaries in my life in terms of working and not working and things like that. And I love those thoughts about healthy boundaries leading to healthy people. That was powerful. We covered mental health. We covered religion and faith. I think that was a critical conversation. Again, whether you're a believer or not, these are questions that we wrestle with, existential questions that I think all of us look at and face and wonder. And I love the way that we spoke about that today. I hope that you gained insights as well, that it wasn't just me, that you feel uplifted from this conversation. I'm excited to see what Tim and Aubrey do in the future. Like I said, I'm grateful for that friendship, and I'm grateful for your support. Please don't hesitate to subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tell your friends about the Extraordinary Us podcast. We'll see you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Extraordinary Us podcast with Jeff Burningham. Please help us grow by leaving a rating and review and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Also, tell your friends and share on social media. See you again next week.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Jeff.
And Sal.
I'm here with my wife. Why? Because we're starting a podcast together.
Yes, we are.
And it's called
Under Our Bed.
Why is it called that, Sally?
Because we are sitting under our bed right now.
We are.
In this podcast
Yes. And we're going to be talking about things that are interesting, vulnerable, relevant.
studio. Funny.
So check it out. Funny if you're on. So check it out wherever you get your podcast, wherever you listen to The Extraordinary Us. Look for Under Our Bed with Jeff and Sal.
Check it out.
Good night.
Good night.